Hi everybody, my name is Amanda. I am a hand embroidery artist, and on this channel I like to teach people how to embroider and help to inspire you to make something creative. In this video, I wanted to go over needle sizing. This is a question that I get a lot. People get very confused with needle sizes and how you should choose the right size for whatever project or thread you're using. So I figured I would just do a video dedicated around explaining the benefits of using the properly sized needle, as well as some tips and tricks for figuring out which size would be best to use for different strands of thread. So does needle sizing really make that big of a difference? Honestly, in my experience, it actually does. I used to reach for whatever size needle I had on hand and try to thread it, and if I could thread it, I would use it. But I started noticing that my embroidery stitches just weren't that neat, and I felt like I was putting a lot of time and energy into trying to make them look nice, but I just was not getting the results that I wanted. While there are certain techniques that might help improve the neatness of your embroidery, I think that using a properly sized needle is a really easy and quick way to fix a lot of the issues that you run into. And it also just makes your finished work look a whole lot better. So that is why I felt like this video was important to go over. I feel like needle sizing is something that can be kind of overwhelming and confusing, but once you learn the basics of it, it's really not that tricky. When you use a properly sized needle, it's going to be way easier for you to embroider. It'll be way easier for you to pass the needle and the thread through the fabric, and it's also way easier to fit in a decent amount of detail into your work. So if you're having trouble with holes in your work or with areas where you feel like you're not able to densely pack the stitches together, you may be using the wrong size needle. So let's get into some little things about needle sizing. And just a disclaimer, I'm going to be going over sizes for embroidery needles only. There's a couple of different kinds of embroidery needles out there, but these are generally the ones that you would use for surface embroidery. So I like to use John James needles. These are my favorite. They don't tarnish easily, they don't bend easily, and I can use them for multiple projects. So I'll leave a link to these if you're interested in checking them out. This is what I base my sizing off usually. Sizing can vary a little bit brand to brand, which is why I bring this up. I think generally the rules of sizing are pretty much the same, but they may, if you compare needles, you may notice a little bit of a slight difference between the sizes. So needle sizes come in size 1 to 10 usually. The smaller the needle, the larger the number, so it's kind of flip-flopped in what you would think it would be. But a size 10 is a really small needle, and a size 1 is a relatively large needle. And the small needles, the size 10 needles, are going to have a smaller eye of the needle and a narrower shaft of the needle. And then the larger the needle, you're going to have a larger eye and a thicker shaft of the needle. This will basically make it to where your thread will have enough room to pass through the fabric. And you want to have a properly sized needle because you don't want to overly disturb the weave of the fabric and leave big holes in the fabric. But you also don't want to only make a tiny hole and then force thread through it, because you can also disrupt the fabric that way. So these are some reasons why I think it's really important to make sure that you are choosing the correct size. I like to use one strand of floss, of like cotton floss, with a size 10 needle. And then if I'm using all 6 strands, I would probably go for a size 3 needle. So that's kind of what I would think of on the spectrum of where you should choose an embroidery needle. I'll leave a link to a blog post that I have in the description that has a chart you can save just for suggestions on what sizes you should do. But generally I would say if you're using 2 strands, you could use like a size 7 or 8 needle. And then if you're going up to like 3 or 4 strands, you'll probably want to use something like a size 5 or something like that. Then all 6 strands, which is a little bit more rare, but sometimes there's reasons for using that, you would use a size 3. So that is just kind of a general rule of thumb, and it's not an exact science. So I did want to put that out there. You don't have to be super prescriptive about it, but I do think it helps with kind of figuring out what's going to work for you. Now, once you start using needles and you have them in a pincushion like this, it can be hard to like figure out which exact size everything is. So that is where I just wanted to kind of go over some tips on finding the right size. It's a little bit of trial and error if you're not sure what size you have in your pincushion, but these tips will help you kind of find the nice Goldilocks happy medium. If you are finding it really, really hard to thread a needle, or you're feeling like only parts of the strands are going through the eye of the needle, then you're probably using too small of a needle. If you are noticing that it's really, really hard to pull the needle and thread through the fabric and you're really feeling a pop when you pull it through, then you're also potentially using too small of a needle and it's not making a hole large enough for the thread to pass through efficiently. If you are having thread breaking, you also may be using too small of a needle. If you are noticing that you have large holes in the fabric and they're kind of visible and you're able to see through the fabric, then you may be using too large of a needle. This is basically where your needle is making a really large hole and the thread is not filling in that hole, so you have open gaps in the weave of the fabric. If you are having a lot of trouble fitting in detail and you feel like the stitches you're not able to kind of lay them neatly beside one another, then you're probably using too large of a needle. If you feel like your stitches just look generally kind of messy and you're not able to densely pack them together, then you also may be using too large of a needle. When you use a really large needle and you're using less thread, it's basically disturbing the surrounding stitches, especially if you're doing things like thread painting. So that's why it's really important to try and get a needle that's a decent size. If you find that the tail of the thread keeps slipping out of your needle, then you also may be using too large of a needle. The eye of the needle just may be too big for how many strands you're using. If you have trouble remembering what size needles you're using, I don't generally keep these packs. Like once I open a needle, I don't put it back because I don't want to be putting used needles back and then have a bunch of dull needles. So what I like to do is, beyond storing them in a pincushion, which can get kind of crowded and confusing and you don't really know what size you have, I personally like to use these little needle books, and I actually have a pattern for this particular one, and you can just put them on the sheets of felt here, and then I have a little number to label different sizes. So I just find this is like a cute and handy way to label stuff to where you can put it back in its place and then you don't have to guess and do a bunch of trial and error to figure out which needle is going to work best. So that is a quick and easy way to just have everything accessible and you're ready to stitch. I hope that you found this little video helpful. I do have a couple of other videos on needles, more so about different types of embroidery needles and that sort of thing. So I'll make sure to link those as well if you want to learn more about all of the different types and brands and all of that kind of stuff. But if you enjoyed this video and you'd like to see more embroidery tutorials and content, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.